On May 1st, 1943, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz sat in his headquarters outside Paris, studying a figure that should have filled him with pride: 14 million tons. In just 3.5 years, his U-boats had sent 14 million tons of Allied shipping to the bottom of the Atlantic. His captains called these seas the happy time, a vast killing ground where German submarines decided when, where, and how the enemy would die. Dönitz had built this weapon almost from nothing. At the outbreak of war, he had only 27 U-boats. Now, more than 200 were operational. He had spent 2 decades preparing for this moment. 20 years perfecting tactics, training crews, and shaping a small submarine arm into the most dangerous naval force on Earth. And yet, within the next 30 days, something would occur that Dönitz could neither predict nor understand. That morning, as he examined the Atlantic operations map, everything appeared flawless. Blue markers stretched across thousands of miles of ocean, each one representing a U-boat, each one a weapon under his command. 43 boats were already on patrol in the North Atlantic. Others prowled the Bay of Biscay. More were en route to their assigned hunting grounds. His operations officer had just delivered the daily briefing. Convoy OS-5 had been sighted. 42 merchant ships inching westward at 7 knots. 38 U-boats were already moving into position. 38 wolves closing in on 42 sheep. Exactly as Dönitz had envisioned. This was his system. He had conceived it himself. 20 years of thought, planning, and refinement. Everson, the British destroyer, had forced his own submarine to the surface with depth charges in 1918. The rest of that war he spent in a prisoner of war camp, imagining what submarines could one day become. The Wolfpack was his invention, his weapon. The concept was deceptively simple. U-boats were spread along the main convoy routes, forming patrol lines that stretched across hundreds of miles of open ocean. When a single submarine detected a convoy, it did not attack on its own. Instead, it followed the target at a distance and transmitted its position back to Paris. From there, Dönitz ordered the hunt. 10 submarines, 15, sometimes 20 or more, would be summoned to the same target. They would strike together, night after night, overwhelming the escorts through sheer numbers. For 3 years, the British had no effective answer. The evidence was undeniable. In February, Convoy SE 118 lost 13 ships. In March, Convoy HX 229 saw 22 merchant vessels destroyed in just 4 days. The totals piled up on Dönitz's charts like entries in a ledger, each sinking another step toward victory. Dönitz had calculated it with cold precision. Sink 700,000 tons of shipping each month, and Britain would be forced to surrender. In 1942, his submarines came dangerously close, some months exceeding 600,000 tons sunk. The graphs climbed steadily upward, like a staircase leading straight to triumph. Even Hitler took notice. In January, Dönitz was promoted to Gross Admiral and given command of the entire German Navy. At 51 years old, with 200 operational U-boats under his control, he commanded the most powerful submarine fleet the world had ever seen. Now, on this May morning, 38 of those submarines were converging on Convoy OS-5. By all appearances, it would be another routine massacre. The method never changed. The U-boats would locate the convoy, trail it throughout the daylight hours, then attack after nightfall when the escorts could not see them. By dawn, the sea would be lit by burning ships. But this time, though Dönitz did not yet realize it, the pattern was about to fail. While the Germans had perfected their system, the Allies had been quietly constructing one of their own, not in weeks or months, but over years, patiently, systematically, piece by technological piece. Somewhere in the dark waters of the North Atlantic, that system was about to come alive. Within 72 hours, 6 of the 38 U-boats would be destroyed. Within 30 days, 43 submarines would disappear from Dönitz's map forever. The Gross Admiral was about to discover that his flawless system contained a deadly weakness. He just didn't know what it was yet. The first indication that something essential had shifted appeared in late April 1943. Dönitz was monitoring a slow-moving westbound convoy, 42 merchant vessels, mostly aging freighters and tankers, inching across the Atlantic at 7 knots toward North America. On paper, it was a perfect target. For 3 years, his wolf packs have been annihilating convoys exactly like this. Slow, predictable, and guarded by only a small number of escorts that could never protect every ship at once. Dönitz ordered nearly 40 U-boats to intercept it, one of the largest submarine concentrations he had ever committed against a single convoy. From his headquarters, he observed the operation unfold just as countless successful attacks had before. The submarines spread out along the expected route. They located the convoy. Contact reports came in. More boats were summoned to the scene. The first night proceeded exactly as Dönitz anticipated. Torpedoes struck home. Merchant ships erupted in fire, broke apart, and disappeared beneath the waves. Commanders reported multiple sinkings. But this time, something was wrong. Dönitz sensed in the radio traffic returning from the front, especially from his most seasoned captains. The messages told a different story. Enemy aircraft appearing at night without warning. Forced dive. Attacked by aircraft hundreds of meters from land. Serious damage sustained. Radar contact detected on enemy ships before visual sighting. Position compromised. Unable to hold attack stations. Constant air patrols forcing submarines to remain submerged. These were not the kinds of reports Dönitz was accustomed to receiving from his wolf packs. The men sending them were veterans, commanders with years of combat experience. Many wearing the Knight's Cross at their throats, Germany's highest award for bravery. Something fundamental had changed at sea. They were veterans, men who had survived dozens of patrols. They knew how to stalk and attack convoys under cover of darkness. And yet now they were reporting something that made no sense. Enemy aircraft locating them in the middle of the Atlantic, hundreds of miles from the nearest land base, at night, in fog, in rain. Dönitz could not comprehend it. The mid-Atlantic had always been a sanctuary. Aircraft simply could not reach that far. That was an unchangeable fact of geography. Still, he pushed forward. He committed more submarines, fired more torpedoes, and increased the pressure on convoy ONS-5. If the convoy could be destroyed, the losses would be justified. When ONS-5 finally slipped away into a dense fog bank on May 6, the results were grim. 13 merchant ships had been sunk, but 6 U-boats were gone, confirmed destroyed with all hands lost. 6 more had been so badly damaged by aircraft and escort attacks that they were forced to withdraw and struggle back to bases in France. Nearly 1/4 of his attacking force had been destroyed or rendered ineffective in a single convoy battle. Dönitz studied the after-action report sent in by the surviving commanders. The pattern was impossible to ignore, even if the cause remained unclear. His submarines were being discovered by some method his crews could not detect, tracked with precision that seemed unreal, and destroyed, often before they could even get within torpedo range. Something fundamental had changed in the Atlantic, and Karl Dönitz, the architect of the U-boat campaign, did not understand what it was. For 2 decades, Dönitz had believed that communication was the greatest strength of his submarine force. His boats did not operate in isolation. They reported contacts to headquarters. He analyzed the information. He directed the attacks. The Wolfpack functioned as a single coordinated weapon because every submarine was linked by radio to his command center in Paris. What Dönitz could not know, what would have horrified him had he realized it, was that every radio transmission from his U-boats had become a death sentence. The British had developed a system known as HF/DF, high-frequency direction finding, or HFDUF. Its principle was simple, but its effect was devastating. Specialized antennas on escort ships and coastal stations could determine the bearing of any radio signal within seconds. A U-boat commander would key his transmitter to report a convoy sighting. The transmission might last only 30 seconds, but in those 30 seconds, the direction-finding stations had his position, and once they had it, the hunt began that a single bearing revealed only that a transmission originated somewhere along a straight line extending outward from a listening station. On its own, it meant very little, but at a second bearing, a third, a fourth, and suddenly a position emerged, a precise fix, a point in the ocean where a U-boat had just transmitted and where it almost certainly still was, because submarines moved slowly. Every time one of Dönitz's commanders obeyed orders and reported a sighting, he was unknowingly announcing his location to the enemy. The British had been improving this capability for 3 years. By May 1943, they could determine a U-boat's position within minutes of any radio transmission. But direction finding was only part of what Dönitz could not see. There was another technology, one his intelligence staff had seriously underestimated. The Allies called it centimetric radar. Early in the war, radar operated on long wavelengths, often a meter or more. These systems could detect large surface ships at useful ranges, but spotting something as small as a submarine's conning tower against a clutter of ocean waves was nearly impossible. By 1943, British and American engineers had solved that problem. Using a breakthrough device known as a cavity magnetron, they developed radar operating at wavelengths of around 10 centimeters. These new sets could detect a periscope from several miles away. A surface submarine's conning tower could be picked up from 10 miles or more, even at night in fog or in heavy rain. Hundreds of these radar sets were now installed on escort vessels and patrol aircraft across the Atlantic. For Dönitz and his commanders, this meant that what had once been their greatest advantage had turned into a deadly snare. A U-boat captain would surface under cover of darkness, confident that no one could see him. Diesel engines would roar to life to recharge the batteries. Lookouts would climb onto the bridge, scanning the black horizon. Nothing in sight, nothing to hear. Then, without warning, an aircraft would burst out of the night sky, its searchlight blazing. Depth charges would already be falling. The crew might have 30 seconds to crash dive, sometimes less. U-boat commanders were dying in the darkness, without understanding how or why. They could not see the invisible radar waves striking their conning towers. They could not know that radio bearings were being plotted, intersecting lines slowly closing in on their exact position. The ocean itself had turned against them. All they knew was that the Atlantic had become a place where U-boats were being discovered and destroyed with frightening, machine-like precision. As the first 2 weeks of May slipped by, Dönitz was forced to confront a realization even more disturbing than the convoy battles themselves. The danger was no longer confined to the North Atlantic shipping lanes. Every U-boat operating in the Atlantic had to pass through the Bay of Biscay. That narrow stretch of water between France and Spain was the only gateway from the German submarine bases to the open ocean. For 3 years, commanders had accepted the bay as a calculated risk. Allied patrol aircraft were present, yes, but the ocean was vast, coverage was limited, and an experienced captain could usually slip through. By May 1943, that assumption was no longer true. The Bay of Biscay had become a slaughterhouse. Loss reports arrived at Dönitz headquarters one after another, each one another boat erased from his operational map. May 5th, U-125, caught on the surface after being illuminated by an aircraft, then attacked by 2 British destroyers, sunk with all hands. 54 men lost. May 7th, U-663, attacked by a Coastal Command aircraft while returning from patrol. So badly damaged she would never sail again. 3 killed, 16 wounded. May 13th, U-456, depth charged by a Liberator in the bay. Managed to dive, but the damage was beyond repair. She sank 2 days later. 49 dead. May 14th, U-266, destroyed by a Sunderland flying boat. No survivors. May 15th, U-463, a vital supply submarine, the kind Dönitz desperately needed to keep his attack boats at sea longer, found and destroyed by a Coastal Command Halifax. All hands lost. The pattern was impossible to ignore. RAF and USAF aircraft were flying continuous patrols over the Bay of Biscay, day and night, using systematic search patterns designed to cover every transit route. Their centimetric radar detected submarines in complete darkness. Their depth charges were calibrated to detonate at exact depths. Dönitz boats were being eliminated before they could even reach the convoy lanes. For a man who had spent his entire career balancing tonnage sunk against tonnage loss, this was a new equation, one he had never anticipated, and one that did not add up in his favor. He was losing submarines, and with them, highly trained crews that took years to produce, along with commanders whose combat experience could never be replaced, without sinking a single Allied ship in return. Simply reaching the battle zone had become as dangerous as the fighting itself. During the second week of May, Dönitz ordered changes to transit procedures. Commanders were told to remain submerged for longer periods, surface only at night, and cross the Bay of Biscay in groups so submarines could provide mutual anti-aircraft fire. None of it made any difference. The aircraft kept appearing. The radar continued to find them. The depth charges kept falling. The Bay of Biscay had turned into a conveyor belt of destruction, and Dönitz had no way to shut it down. By the third week of May, Karl Dönitz began to grasp the scale of what was unfolding. Each morning, his operations staff updated the massive situation map that covered an entire wall of his headquarters. Blue markers showed U-boats on patrol. Red marked vessels damaged or overdue. Black, his most dreaded color, indicated confirmed losses. The black markers were multiplying at a rate he had never seen before. May 14th, U-640 vanished in the North Atlantic without sending any distress signal, presumed sunk with all 49 crewmen. May 15th, U-176 and U-657, both lost within the same 24-hour period. 2 submarines, 2 crews, nearly 100 men gone. May 16th, U-182, destroyed by American escorts while attacking a convoy. No survivors. May 17th, 3 more confirmed losses. U-128 in the South Atlantic, U-646 in the North Atlantic, and U-463, the vital supply submarine, lost in the Bay of Biscay. Another 150 men who would never return. May 19th, U-954 lost with all hands. U-273 lost with all hands. U-381 lost with all hands. The tempo was relentless. Every day brought new black markers. Every morning added new names to the growing list of the dead. Dönitz had seen losses before. Submarine warfare was inherently dangerous. He had known that since his own boat was destroyed in 1918, some level of attrition was unavoidable. But this was something else. This was annihilation. He ran the numbers himself, unwilling to rely on his staff to deliver figures this catastrophic. U-boats were being lost faster than German shipyards could replace them. Production averaged roughly 25 submarines per month. Nearly that many had already been destroyed in just the first 2 weeks of May. Crews were being lost even faster. Training a competent U-boat crew required 18 months to 2 years. The men dying in the Atlantic represented years of preparation, years of investment. If the losses continued at this pace for another 3 months, there would be no operational U-boat force left in the Atlantic. None. Only empty pens and silent command rooms. The mathematics were brutal, and Dönitz was a man who understood numbers. By May 20th, 31 U-boats had been confirmed destroyed. More were overdue and presumed lost. Nearly 800 trained submariners were dead, more than an entire pre-war U-boat flotilla. Some boats vanished without ever sending a final message. One moment they were reporting positions from their patrol areas. The next, they were simply gone. The following morning, there was nothing, only silence. The precise fate of those boats would never be known. Others transmitted frantic final signals, messages that radio operators in Paris received, logged, and filed away. Under attack by multiple aircraft. Heavy damage. Taking on water. Unable to dive. Engine room flooding. And then nothing more. Dönitz slowly began to grasp a reality that contradicted everything he had believed for the past 20 years. His doctrine was not failing because it was flawed. His commanders were not dying because they had made errors. His crews were not being destroyed due to a lack of courage, discipline, or training. Something else was at work. Something systematic. Something that functioned with industrial efficiency. The Allies were no longer simply escorting convoys more effectively. They had constructed a machine, an integrated system of technology, intelligence, and procedure that was locating and destroying U-boats at a rate no previous naval conflict had ever seen. And Dönitz had nothing comparable to oppose it. On May 24th, 1943, Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz made a decision that would have been unimaginable just 3 months earlier. He ordered the U-boat force to withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes. The message was transmitted by encrypted radio to every submarine at sea. Disengage from current operations. Proceed to areas with reduced air coverage. Await further instructions. Dönitz chose the official wording with care. The directive described a temporary redeployment and operational adjustments in response to increased enemy defensive measures, language suitable for official reports to Berlin. But in his private war diary, the record he kept for himself, he wrote something far closer to the truth. The enemy, he noted, had achieved a level of superiority that could not be countered by tactical changes alone. His submarines were being detected and destroyed by technical means before they could complete their missions. The rate of loss had become operationally unsustainable. For a man who had spent 2 decades building the U-boat arm into Germany's most powerful weapon, writing those words must have been agony. Dönitz did not surrender entirely. He was not a man who simply gave up. He ordered his technical staff to accelerate work on countermeasures, radar warning receivers to alert crews to approaching aircraft, new submarine designs with greater underwater speed and endurance, and the snorkel device that will allow diesel engines to operate while submerged. He redeployed some boats to distant theaters where Allied air coverage was thinner, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, the waters off West Africa. But deep down, even if he could never fully admit it to Berlin, Dönitz understood that the decisive struggle had already been lost. Black May had cost him 43 submarines and approximately 750 trained submariners. The Atlantic War had turned, permanently, more than anything else. The events of that spring proved what raw statistics had only hinted at. The tonnage war was finished. Even if his submarines continued to sail, they could no longer sink merchant ships faster than American shipyards could replace them. Even if his crews fought on with desperate bravery, they could not survive in an ocean that had been transformed into a fully integrated killing system. The balance of attrition had shifted, and mathematics is indifferent to courage, skill, or willpower. Years later, after the war had ended, after Germany lay shattered and Dönitz himself had stood before the judges at Nuremberg, the aging admiral wrote his memoirs. He chose his words carefully when addressing Black May. He defended his strategic choices. He honored the young men who had obeyed his orders and sailed into seas that had become a mechanized death trap. He suggested that with superior technology, resources Germany simply did not possess, the outcome might have been different. Yet buried within those pages was a quiet admission of what he had truly learned in May 1943. The enemy's technical and material superiority, he wrote, had reached a level that made continuation of the U-boat campaign impossible. Not a failure of courage, not a lack of seamanship, not errors in tactics or a shortage of heroism. It was factories and engineers, scientists and assembly lines that never stopped, research laboratories that produced solution after solution, an industrial system capable of building ships, aircraft, and radar faster than Germany could construct submarines or train crews. That was what defeated Karl Dönitz. In May 1943, he commanded some of the most experienced submarine crews on Earth, men who had survived dozens of patrols through waters where death waited in every direction, officers who had sent hundreds of thousands of tons of enemy shipping to the bottom, sailors who accepted the risk of dying in a steel coffin every time they submerged. It was not enough. The Atlantic had become a battlefield where individual bravery could not overcome systemic superiority, where courage meant nothing against a pulse of radar, where experience offered no protection against a depth charge dropped by a pilot who had detected you from 40 miles away using technology you didn't even know existed. For the remainder of the war, U-boats would continue to put to sea. New submarine designs would be rushed out of the shipyards. Crews would be trained, would fight, and would die in ever greater numbers. But the Battle of the Atlantic, the true struggle for control of the sea lanes that kept Britain alive and made the invasion of Europe possible, had already been decided. It was decided in those 30 brutal days of May 1943. Every tank that rolled ashore in Normandy, every bomber that lifted off from airfields in England, every rifle, every bandage, every gallon of fuel that carried Allied armies across France and into Germany, all of it depended on convoys that could now cross the Atlantic without facing catastrophic losses. Karl Dönitz had spent 20 years creating a weapon meant to choke an island nation into submission. In a single month, he learned what that weapon could not defeat. Not ships, not sailors, but systems. Thank you for watching. If this story helped you understand how technology and industrial power determine the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic, Please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. We tell the lesser-known stories of World War II, the ones that show what the war looked like from the other side. Where are you watching from today? And what story would you like us to tell next? Leave a comment below. Your support helps us continue bringing these stories to life.